I'm going to welcome Tim Warwick, who's currently the manager of the vet cluster transitions funding and project from a policy perspective within the Department of Education. Been working very closely with Tim, obviously, for the last 3 or 4 months. It's been an absolute joy working with Tim and his team, and he's going to give us a bit of an update from there.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. We're a joy, Jack. We don't get told that every day, do we? How nice. Great to be here. This is Jack Viola. He works on the vet clusters too. I'm Tim, have been with the task force about 12 months. Really excited to be here, and I think this is so awesome to see you all in the room together, starting to talk as a network around this important work, or continuing a conversation around this very important work. For those of you that are relatively new to the space, I guess one of the key messages that I want to communicate today is one, that VDSS, so Vet Delivered to School Students, we will have acronym kind of palooza this afternoon, but VDSS is a very significant priority for the department and for the task force. We have our whole kind of branch of the task force is about VDSS and expanding access to VDSS. Those of you who are familiar with the changes that have happened around the vocational major know that there is increasing demand for it across our schools. We have lots of schools that are offering meaningful access to vet for the first time. And so to that end, vet clusters and the work that you're all contributing to is really critical. And the department believes they are the kind of critical architecture for ensuring really strong access to vet. We'll hear a lot today from 5 of your colleagues who have led in this space for a long time, and they're a great example of the amazing work that's possible to expand access for young people. So it's really exciting to do that. And the whole point of this partnership with the network is to grow and spread that across the network. And before I get into the nitty-gritty of today, just a huge shout out and thanks for all your hard work to take hold of that opportunity and to make the most of it. There are definitely always going to be some bumps, so thanks for navigating those. Continue to kind of communicate with us about the bumps. There'll be opportunity to ask some questions today as well. But overall, we're extremely happy with how things are travelling. If you think about some of you, or many of you even, will have been part of kind of the place-based planning kind of processes of the last couple of years, where we kind of got people in a room and told them to collaborate. Yeah, some things came from that, but not kind of the meaningful, deep engagement that we need to really properly expand access, and you're now all really enabling that, which is really cool. So before I start though, talking about clusters, I do just want to talk about the 2 groups that we have here today. So we've got Lens here, and then we've got a lot of our regional pathways workforce colleagues here as well. And we just are really wanting to stress as a task force that we think this partnership between Lens and Regional Pathways Workforce is critical. You are both critical kind of place-based supports to schools and to young people, and are really critical to the implementation of the reforms. We recognise that as a task force, we haven't done a huge amount of purposeful work in this space. An occasion like today, where a lot of you are in a room together or in an online room together, is relatively unusual. So we certainly want to be thinking about that strategically as a task force, and we'll be doing some work around that over the next few months. And we see this kind of vet clusters piece as a great example of that, and an area where there's really strong opportunities for collaboration, including these supports that the LEN network are putting in place. And we have lots of great examples about of where this partnership is really strong, and we're going to hear in a second from Andrew and Diana about how the partnership works for them in their area. So yeah, I guess this is really just flagging an intention that this is a priority for the task force, and you'll continue to hear more about this. Just really quickly, also in acronym Palooza, Regional Pathways Workforce, or the RPW, encompasses our Jobs, Skills and Pathways Managers, our JSPMs, as well as our Senior Job, Skills, Pathways SJS. It should be a test. Great. You can, I'll give you points. Officers, SJSPOs, as well as at a regional level, our MyPats, which I'm going to fail the test. I'm looking at my colleagues, manager of Great. Manager of Youth Pathways and Transitions. Whoa. I stuffed that one up. Don't tell any MyPats. So if you hear us referring to the RPW, that's who we're talking about. You obviously mainly will work with the JSPMs and the SJSPOs. But yeah, really keen. Andrew and Diana were just going to quickly share their reflections on what do they think the key kind of enablers of that partnership are.
All of the slides that are being presented today will also be sent out post today as well. So this is Di. So Di and I work very closely. She's the JSPM of the Southern Melbourne area. So Di, you can go first if you like.
Right. Okay, a bit of context on the Southern Melbourne area and our vet cluster. So our area is actually aligned geographically to the lens boundaries as well. So that makes our relationship probably a lot easier to start off with geographically, which I know that does present quite a challenge to some groups. So I just want to acknowledge that from the start. So, and also Southern Melbourne has traditionally been and historically been quite a strong space in terms of vocational learning in secondary schools. And we've had a lot of experienced vet in our schools for a long, long time pre the reform. So again, there's a lot of experience in the space. But in terms of the vet cluster, it's really, I see our work as a vet cluster is in our collaboration. And so it is, I see Andrew and the team at Selen in that space as colleagues, rather than that we're working in sort of a different space. We're working together for the same reason, and it's really all about the students and improving access for our students. And so if we have that at the sort of front and centre, it's how we get along, very transparent in understanding that the LEN has different portfolios and what their work is. And I don't want to start to enter any of some of that work. Thanks, so fine. But in terms of the vet cluster, there is obviously a strong crossover in our role as JSPMs. And so from the start, when I started in this role 2 years ago now, I obviously started that working relationship with Andrew, and we're probably on the phone to each other 2 or 3 times a week when things come up. Very respectful in the way we deal with different situations, but always an open and transparent relationship is what has sort of what we've built it off to start off with. You want to go from there?
Thank you. So I think that the other thing from a LEN perspective, there's lots of other benefits for us to be engaged with the Department of Regional Office and with Di and her team. So we're a growth corridor. We've got, 14 new schools that have opened in the last 8 or 9 years. We do a lot of stuff with them to prepare them for this space. There's lots of those sorts of things where you just pick up the phone and say, Di or her team will say, we're doing this, can you come and present, talk about A, B and C. So there's a lot of professional overlap as well when it comes to that sort of stuff. But I think the key is that we're here for one reason, and that's to get increased access for our students and better outcomes. And if that's the platform that we're working from and it's a common and shared goal, then everything else just flows out of that and it makes it a really easy relationship. So thank you. I think instead of asking the questions why we should, if you're not, the question is why aren't you? Because there's so many benefits. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks both. And great. We'll pause for 2-3 minutes. If you just want to have a chat about your table about what you see as some of the enablers of that partnership between RPW and the Lens, that would be great. So 2-3 minutes of a chat. All right. Firstly, thanks for that conversation and a start of a conversation. As I've stressed to you all recently when we've met in other forums, very keen to be receiving feedback and thoughts about that partnership. So please do reach out to me or other parts of the task force. We kind of the LEN team as well as the Regional Pathways Workforce team are all part of these conversations as well, and we're collectively looking at how we support that partnership. So please do keep feeding back to us. But yeah, a huge shout out to all the great work that you're doing together. And this, on that note, is a fantastic example. So this is just a bit of an update about how we're tracking around applications and for the VET cluster transition funding. As you'll see here, we've got 19, so 13, well, it's ticked up to 14 now, 14 applications that have been completely successful. So all of those clusters have received their funding. And then another 5 that have submitted the first stage of the paperwork and are just finalising their kind of implementation planning. So that's 19 new and existing clusters that have got considerable additional resources to help them with this really important work of VET coordination. And I think most importantly, that also represents a lot of hard work from you all to engage those schools around this concept, around how they can be working better together to support their students in VDSS, a really significant amount of really strategic work to manage some complex relationships out there on the ground and some complex dynamics between schools. So a huge, shout out to all that work, and I reckon that's worthy of a big clap to you all, because that's really awesome progress. The other kind of half of clusters, they're also progressing well. We are really in touch with kind of all of you and are across where all of those are at. Very understanding that there's some further complex work there with some of them to get them ready for this work. We are going to look at kind of putting a kind of end date on this opportunity, and because we'd love to see all kind of clusters having in place resourcing from at least the beginning of next year. So we're going to work with those clusters that are still looking at how they can apply for this funding around that. So don't be stressed by that. We're very confident that everyone will be very comfortably able to meet that, but we think it would be helpful to kind of say we're going to work towards a particular end date for all of this. So we just wanted to flag that with you today. We also just want to really acknowledge that the applications that we've received are really excellent. The thought that has gone into them and the clarity of what the next steps are for those clusters, they're all different. So it's really clear that everyone's kind of worked very closely with their schools to identify what the priorities are. So yeah, huge shout out to that. And yeah, the final point is Jack and I are really keen to support this process to move as fast as you can manage it. So if there's any kind of blockers that you see currently, we're happy to look at creative ways or kind of alternate arrangements to help you kind of get your application in and this resourcing. So please do keep communicating with us about that. And likewise, a number of you have been going to Andrew with different questions, and that will only grow from today, I think, as we continue to kind of look at what supports we're doing as a network. So please do keep that up. We'll talk further around the support that Selen and the other kind of leading Lens are going to provide at the end of today, but just to give a bit of a teaser, obviously we're looking at kind of mentor and support arrangements. You've got your regular kind of Q&A set up, professional development, there's a real opportunity, given all the work that's been done, to identify the priorities for each cluster, to come up with a really kind of clear professional learning plan, to really be the best support possible to all of you with setting up these things. As I communicated by email a couple of weeks ago, we at this stage are not in a position to provide an update about funding. We would love to be. Please know that we know this is a priority for you all to have clarity around this. We are obviously especially keen to provide clarity around the bridge between your current school to work contract and whatever the next one takes. And we understand for clusters that have already received their funding for this, there will be a gap in that. And we want to provide clarity and certainty through that. So that is, I stress, that is a top priority for us. We just need to wait for some good old bureaucratic budgetary processes to allow us to have that clarity. We are told that that will be by October, November, and we will do our best to meet that. I hope that was a great, lots of confidence being expressed there. I said this year. This year. Yeah, I didn't put the year on purpose. No, it's meant to be this year. It's meant to be this year. On that note, I was going to pause there. Is there any other questions about any of that?
You mentioned an end date. What is that end date?
Well, that's what we are still deciding. Basically, we would like everything to be resolved this year. So I guess technically the end date might be 30th of December, but hypothetically we would probably like it to be before that, so that you can have the money in your bank by well before the end of this year. But welcome to feedback.
We're waiting for our regional folks to facilitate the discussion with the principals. Do they know that end date too?
No, so they're getting an email today about
Excellent.
that.
Thank you, sir.
No worries. Thank you.
Northeast Ovens, Murray.
Thank you. But again, it's not a punitive, we're dragging you to an end. We'll collaborate to make sure it's doable for everyone. Yeah. No. And I think that's a good point, good place to note that, thank you from the outset, we've said that initial kind of work sits with Regional Pathways Workforce. So thanks for understanding that and kind of leaving that with them. And I know in that context, there's lots of quirks and challenges around those schools and the geography of that. So thank you for your patience there. And yes, we will work with them to make clear what the path forward looks like. Good question.
There's a couple of questions that have been in the chat.
Oh, great.
Some of the conversations leading up to this one as well. So clarity of roles between LEN and Regional Pathways workforces.
Oh, I'm guessing that means...
As opposed to a question, but...
Okay. I will take that. We will take that as part of this, enabling this partnership, we can provide greater clarity. It's something that in this piece of work, I think the conversation we just had about who had courage of setting up these arrangements with schools was an example where we worked towards providing lots of clarity around that. So we certainly have worked towards that in the vet cluster space, and we can certainly work towards that more overall as a task force. Great point.
And through those Q&A sessions on the Fridays, we can take any feedback again back through Tim and his team, and some feedback that I think it's to do with the JSPMs and LENs, that good communication and willingness to be flexible have been fantastic. So,
awesome. Great. Thanks. Any other cluster related questions? No, we're feeling good. Great.
Look at us go.
How good. All right. Final thing from me today is that we just wanted to provide a bit of clarity. We've been getting a range of questions, which is fine. And I will own up front here that if we were to have our time again with devising this policy, we would not have set a wage aligned to an education support class level. No worries. It definitely caused unneeded angst. So thank you for feeding your questions either directly to us or through your regional pathways workforce. Please know that they have always been reaching out to us for clarity. The intention was for that was to provide an indicative salary level based on two things. One, how schools can resource coordination of VDSS, and two, in our consultation with other LENs working in this space, how LENs can resource coordination of VDSS. So that was the intent. We could have indicated that in other ways rather than explicitly saying it was an ed support level. One of our challenges, I will be upfront, is that from our understanding, the employment arrangements across your LENs can differ quite a bit as well. It's not a consistent kind of approach there. So the actual intent here, and ultimately what lots of you have done, is take the wage level as an indication and then worked out what it needs to look like in your local context, both from what are the conditions that all your other staff and team on, and how you're going to do this in a way that's consistent with that. And two, recognising that we've indicated a level at a statewide, there are going to be location-specific, context-specific factors that might mean that that level is not entirely suitable for the work. Something that has also emerged is that we set a level that was focused on coordination from probably more of an operational perspective. And in a very good way, lots of your clusters have identified more strategic intentions for the work. And that was not what the wage level was set at. And to be very just blunt, it's not the resourcing that we had available to us either. So that is something where we have had a conversation with a small number of you about where there may, if that is really the intent of the governance group, either that work is the responsibility of the governance group, or they need to contribute somehow to the resourcing of the cluster to enable, like as a top-up kind of function, to enable that more strategic work. That's where that kind of recommendation or kind of guidance has come from. But ultimately, it was intended to be indicative salary level, was not meant to be indicative of conditions, which again, we take full responsibility for the confusion there, and we get that education support staff, although that also varies based on the type of education support role that they have, et cetera, but it was not meant to be indicative of conditions. And ultimately, again, it was at that operational level. Dave, do you want to go?
Thanks, Andrew. Look, we had really open and constructive chats, I know, in our region with yourself and Jack about this, and going back to the governance group that's forming in our region in Bendigo, it's one where there's also constraints, obviously, that we're all aware of that schools are facing. And so I would say probably moving forward, where our LEN will stand and is that we will need to look at how we fit this in the next 2 years, any overflow with regards to income versus expenditure into our own budgets, because you get one school that can't. You can't have a couple putting in because it looks like they're influencing, and that becomes a problem. So from our perspective, we had 3 or 4 out of several schools that said yes, and then we had one no, and we had to pull the pin on the whole lot, and which means that the LEN needs to foot that bill. So just making that, not having a whinge, but just making you aware of that scenario.
Yeah, and to be clear, I haven't, like Dave and I have had a few great conversations about this, and none of it is a whinge, because I think it's important advocacy for what is required to enable this work. And we have again, I'm probably being blunt here, and I'm now conscious it's being online and recorded, but we are having rigorous conversations as a task force about the fact that this is a priority for the work, genuinely. And yet it still is not really set up and resourced to fully enable that priority. And we are attempting to resolve that very genuinely within the parameters we have of government and budgets, etc., etc. So please do keep your advocacy up. It is really productive and helpful. So we do want to genuinely understand the work required. Nikki.
Thank you. So Nikki, Central Rangers, Len. And look, I just wanted to add a little, I mean, I really congratulate Dave because it's been a minefield really negotiating that. But I think the other challenge for us from a workforce perspective is the position descriptions are going out across a number of networks. So colleagues are seeing the different PDs that are going out and the different wage structure. So I think that's a challenge. And I was heartened to hear you say it's a priority and it's probably not resourced as it should be for a priority. But it also makes attracting staff a challenge because there is a variety of requirements and then payment structures for what is essentially supposed to be a very set kind of position. And I think you're seeing from the implementation plans that each cluster is quite different and setting its own priorities. And so we appreciate that flexibility, but LENS don't have resourcing to top that up. And that's a challenge. And that's an ongoing challenge for us while we're waiting for our contract. So I'm just alerting you to the workforce are actually comparing position descriptions as the job ads are going out, as are some of us who are about to prepare our position descriptions. We're looking at what is out there so that we can also attract workforce. So there's probably not an answer, it's more a statement, but that's a reality of where we're at the moment.
I think just what I will add is, because I agree, it's hard to have a clear answer there, but what I would say is, if you need, I think some really ambitious implementation plans have been set. From a task force perspective, we're really comfortable with the variation in them because it's been really clear that some clusters are really up for shared provision, for example, and coordinating provision across. Some do not want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And that will take time to build the trust and whatever. You all know this. My point being, if we need to provide some support, and I guess this is what we worked with Dave around, with clarifying to the principals from a system kind of perspective, no, this is the realistic box that you kind of have to play in. And if we can support that and take some of that heat off you all having to do that, then we're keen to hear that, because what you are set up to, and funded to deliver upon needs to be realistic. So
online question.
Great.
It's more of a comment, just really adding to what you have already said, that the LEN don't have the dollars to top up any further. So, yes.
So that was from Anne at Grampians. Glenelg, Southern Grampians. Just that we don't have the money to do that 1/3 top up in our current contracts.
Well, I just remind everyone of kind of the intent of the transition funding, which was that we will cover that contribution during the transition. During whatever form the next contract takes, it will be much more explicit, the funding that is received to support vet clusters. And again, that's, I guess, why we're encouraging everyone to position yourselves to be set up to take on that work, because it will be the opportunity that's in that contract. And the other thing that I would just add is the other layer of transition we saw is that in the existing clusters, and the ones you're going to hear from today, the LENS leading them, they are all contributing resourcing in some way, because over time they've been able to set themselves up so that this is an integral core part of their work, and the other parts of their contract kind of sit around that. Our hope, and I get that this may not have been fully sufficient to enable this, but I just want to kind of explain the rationale. Our hope was that it would provide some breathing space and capacity to look at how you're working as a LEN and how you can use resources to potentially enable that. Not at all asking that in this right now that you find additional resources to contribute it, but to enable that kind of transition that hopefully the next contract will be structured around, if that makes sense.
So can I just add into that?
Please.
Tim? So some of the conversations we've been having about that sustainability aspect of vet clusters going forward, and I spoke to Tim about this, or we've had several discussions about it, but in my mind, there's 3 options, of which one of them's not viable anyway, which is that we've got excess funds that we can tap into for a period of time. The other 2 are that a letter of variation would come through to our existing or on sort of forthcoming school to work contracts that says this is now part of it. But if that happens, something's got to come off the table, because if there's no additional funding. And the third and the most beneficial is that there's additional funding coming into that contract that covers that element of the lens contribution going forward. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's,
we'll see.
I think that's the journey we have ahead of us, right? We're here to do it in partnership. All right. I'm going to probably wrap up there because we've got exciting other content to get to. But I guess my final message is that please do, a number of you are solving for this. And I just want to encourage, continue to communicate with each other, as I'm sure you are, about how to navigate that. Take what we set as an indication of a wage, and then figure out how to make it work locally. Continue to work together and also to work with us to make that realistic for you and work for you. But a big thanks for all your work.
Thank you very much, Tim. Really appreciate you and Jack making the effort to drive up the Calder Freeway, and for your time and your efforts in solving some of these challenges that we're facing.